If you gave your best and your heart stayed true,
keep hauling, keep hauling.
There's only one thing left to do.
Keep hauling, boys.
Forge Flyers is one of the founding teams of the LOC. From humble beginnings, they've had highs, they've had lows, and everything in between. But if there's one constant, they just keep hauling.
Well, that's it. I mean, I was one of the founding teams of the league, and at that point, I had a very, very casual relationship with the NFL and the sport in general. I had a passing interest in the game. I've been to the States a couple of times. I've seen a couple of games. But do I really know what I was doing? Probably not. In fact, definitely not. And that was probably the case for the first maybe 4 or 5 seasons of the league's existence. I felt as though the midpoint of the last decade, the keeper system that we had didn't really benefit me very much. I had a weak team to begin with, which only got progressively weaker as time went on. Partially because of the situation we found ourselves in, and partially because I maybe wasn't as in touch as I am now. But since the system's come back to where we pick a new team every year, I felt as though results definitely improved. My journey doesn't mirror many other people's, I have to say. It's in the sense that it started reasonably well, took a massive downturn, and has come back.
Coach Leach has had a highest scoring team, been regular season champion, and won a Corona Bowl, whilst at the other end setting all-time lows for wins in a season. It's difficult to predict what the next year would bring, and that was truer than ever in 2019.
Well, yeah, as you say, 2017 was a great year. Having won it was a strong all year. 2018 didn't quite work out as we wanted. It's very easy to forget at this point. The stats don't tell you that, but I played without a first-round pick all year, and I think that does make a massive difference. As a result of that, I said to myself, right, I'm going to go with somebody in the first round who's going to be reliable, who's going to be there. He's certainly going to get me the points. I didn't expect Christian McCaffrey to drop to third, I must admit, but he did, and he was there, and I took him, and I think that and that gave us a real catalyst for the rest of the year. I picked up some really, really decent players in the draft, but I did say to myself at the beginning of the year, you know what, this isn't the be-all and end-all. So, it's all about regeneration. It's all about refreshing over the course of the year, picking up players at the right time. I was fortunate enough to do that.
First 2 picks of Forge Flyers draft were a slam dunk, landing the RB1 for the season in Christian McCaffrey and an elite receiver in Mike Evans. He would also draft key contributors Marlon Mack, T.Y. Hilton, Will Lutz, and Sterling Shepard. The rest of the roster would be assembled on the fly. After a Week 1 victory against Bare Necessities, Coach Leach would make one of the most important roster moves of his season.
I saw that the Cowboys were absolutely electric. Their passing game was brilliant. That looked like a different guy. I didn't want to lose my opportunity. And $37 seems a lot, after the first week. But I didn't want to leave it to chance. And I felt as though that if I did that, then that may well, change the course of the year. And for me, it did. And I think to spend $37 on a guy who eventually became the number 2 fantasy QB across the course of the year, with only Lamar Jackson in front of him, was money well spent.
Prescott would go on to be the QB2 in fantasy in 2019, firmly entrenched as the franchise quarterback of Forge Flyers. But the Week 2 key additions did not end there.
The value of a guy like Darren Waller, who, let's be honest, was not only a tight end one, but he was the number 1 receiver on that team for a long period of time throughout the course of the year, and Carlos Hyde, who turned into an RB1, albeit in flashes throughout the year, I thought was worth having. And to be able to pick them up for free was crazy. I mean, let's be honest, you don't find those kind of guys later on in the year with that sort of value who you can pick up in free agency. It was about the same time as well as I picked up the Bills D as well, who were brilliant until the midpoint of the year for me. And they were equally as crucial as both of those pickups.
Forge Flyers essentially had a supplemental draft in Week 2, as Waller, Prescott and Hyde would form the foundations of a rock-solid team with Hilton and Mack, and studs McCaffrey and Evans leading the way. Through 4 weeks, Forge Flyers would be 3-1, but it was Coach Leach's eye for a niche that would be the final cherry on top of what he had already built.
Across the league, we're still getting used to, at this point anyway, the way the new roster system is working. And I felt as though after those first 5-6 weeks that the number one position that wasn't being exploited was tight end, because you know what, people didn't want to use tight ends. People were leaving tight ends on the board because they didn't have to play them. And for me, I thought to myself, you know what, these guys, they've got red zone targets, they've got touchdowns in them. So they're starting every game, they're getting plenty of looks. Why aren't people picking them up? And I think that's because of the stigma of the position. I would much rather play a number one tight end over a second receiver or a third receiver. Yeah, I think it was my way of adapting to the new rule changes. And it definitely worked out for a period.
In the LOC's new Superflex format for the 2019 season, each team saw a starting spot and a bench spot less, but great flexibility in what they could field. Many chose to not field tight ends at all, but Chris zagged when everyone else zigged by fielding multiple tight ends, and it was working. He added Disley and Hooper in addition to Waller, and fielded 2 tight ends in weeks 4 and 6, winning both games. Chris would score a season-high 161 points in week 8, with a win over bare necessities to go 6-2.
Almost perfection. To be honest with you, I can never remember being in the 160s at any point. It's been a long time if I had. So that was really pleasing. For all of my players, bar the kicker, to be in double digits, for 3 guys to be in the 20s and 1 in the 30s. It's pretty much what you want it to be. Granted, there were some soft matchups, and that really is where my season peaked. It being week 8 as well was brilliant. So yeah, it was a good way to go over the hump. But yeah, that was probably the last time of the season that every player on the team fired correctly. Yeah, to score 160 right now is hard. You really do have to have a lot of things go your way, but yeah, pleasing all the same. And if that's one for the ages, then so be it.
All but one of Forge Flyers players would score over 10 points. The one that didn't was a kicker. With a crucial fill-in from Goff and yet another masterful add of Latavius Murray, Forge Flyers rolled on. But as we see with many great teams, Forge Flyers began to sputter down the stretch, winning only 2 of their last 5 games, going over 96 points only twice.
I had a terrible week against Pat in week 12. But other than that, I lost 2 games in the front end of the season, the game against Pat, and 2 more in the back end of the season. Doing a little bit of maths myself, I'd averaged up to and including week 8, 114 points a game, which is amazing. And in the second half of the season, from week 9 to the end of the regular season, was 101 points a game. So yes, it was a come down, but in relative terms, you're still going to take 101 points on average a game. The one thing that I can say though is that week 8 was the zenith, and after that, a guy like Mike Evans, who was playing injured for a large part of the second half of the season, wasn't contributing as much. So we were seeing double-digit 20-point games, even a 30-point game in week 8, and after that, it just fell away.
Forge Flyers bottomed out in a 72-71 defeat to Pakistan, missing Hooper and Mack through injury, with Hilton also being banged up. But they accomplished a 9-5 record, securing the division. They would face regular season powerhouse Tuckfards in week 15, but out of all the roster moves Coach Leach had made in that season, week 15 saw his finest yet, and indeed one of the greatest in LOC history.
Yeah, well, there was just something inside me that said, you know what, Mike Evans is injured at this point. Someone's going to fill that role. And we forget as well that Chris Godwin was dominant in the second half of the season. He was the number 1 receiver. So, you go to a place like Detroit, it's a good matchup. They've got a porous defense, but that's it. They've got to cover someone. They're going to cover Chris Godwin. So on the day, it turned out exactly as I expected. Godwin was covered. Yeah, that's it. Not a lot of points going that way. Perriman got all the looks, all the touchdowns on the day. And yeah, I have to say that it paid off. Would I do it again? Maybe, but sometimes you just got to roll the dice and hope it comes out. And I felt as I had nothing to lose by doing so, and everything to gain. And as it turned out, that's what happened.
Forge Flyers added Brashard Perriman for $1, a player who had only topped 10 fantasy points twice thus far in the season. But what would happen next would be one of the all-time great games in the LOC.
Well, what a game. The number one thing really that people forget about this game is that I was way down to begin with. Mark Ingram had played earlier in the week. I was 22.5 points down. And when you're 22.5 points down, you think to yourself, wow, you've got a long way to go. That is a big total just for one player. But as a result of that, I really agonised over the selection that week. I had Dak, who had a great year, done really well for me up to that point, but was on the down. And Ryan Tannehill, who I just picked up off the waivers again that week, he's playing the Texans, big game. And you know what? I just said to myself, I want to support the Titans. I don't want to sit there and see Tannehill throw 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns, whatever it might be, and go, shit, I wish I played it. That's it. That would have been the worst thing in the world for me. For a large part of that game, or a large part of those early games, I was kicking myself really because I'd left Carlos Hyde on the bench, and he had a great game. He had 16 points. I played Marlon Mack. He didn't have such a good game. So I was thinking to myself, wow, I'm going to lose here, but at least we gave it a go. Towards the later part of the evening, Darren Waller comes on. That's a handy 12.5 points. But even then, at that point, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? Mahomes, Saquon. We've still got the Pats D as well to be up against, and there's got to be no way. So when I went to bed, I thought to myself, you know what? We're there or thereabouts, but I can't see both those receivers not doing anything. And then when I got up the next morning, to my surprise, so it happened. It was very close, and for us both to score in the region of 120 points, and for someone to have to lose that, it was pretty difficult. It was great to take the win in a massive game. For me, that was the game to win. The final after that was an extra. But to win that game was a real vindication of the whole year. And when I woke up the next morning, it did feel great. So don't get me wrong.
The Tuckvards provided another stellar performance, appearing in their first playoff since 2014, out to finally end their title drought. Carrying a 20-point lead into the Sunday night game, it was eroded by Forge Flyers as they won 123-120. But Perriman was the star of the game, coming from the waiver wire to being the highest scoring player in the game.
It's not a rivalry at all, really, is it? Look, there's no heat there, really. I don't go into the game thinking I've got to beat him. That is definitely not the way I approach it. When we both got to the final, I can tell you now, I honestly didn't mind who won. If Ben had won, I would have been very, very happy for him. There is no hate there. There's only love. There's only love there. Despite all the years we've known each other, he still doesn't tell me how he drafts. So he's got a bit of an advantage there.
What laid before Forge Flyers in the Corona Bowl was a matchup they knew all too well and historically have owned. The Friendship Bowl would take place on the biggest stage in Corona Bowl 11, but much like Super Bowl 53, it was a tame affair in which Forge Flyers were firmly expected to win.
Well, I must admit, I expected an all-out onslaught. His team was the team to beat. For me, it felt as though I got to the end of the game and was facing the boss. It's just such a shame that over the course of the week leading up to the final, that 2 of his key players went down, and I think that had that have been the case and we'd have been on a level playing field and a fair fight, I'd have felt a lot better. as we went into it. But as it was, he was going in wounded. He was still very dangerous. They still had some dangerous players. I felt as though he could have been a bit more proactive earlier about adding extra players in that maybe would give him a better chance of winning the game. But it didn't happen.
Coach Leach was correct not to be worried. Due to an injury to Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry, Coach Sherwood's 2 star players were missing and created a sizable hole in his team. To make matters worse, Coach Sherwood had done a poor job of replacing these 2 as well. Quarterback had also been a year-long problem for Ixan, and that was also the case in Corona Bowl 11. This handed a 100-63 victory to Forge Flyers.
It's a really good feeling to be able to vindicate all that time and research and Sunday night anxiety and wake up in the night and checking your scores. That's a big part of it for me. And for a long time, I didn't see any byproduct of that. But as time's gone on, it really does. It really has a vindication for me to do that. And funny enough, both the times that I have won the league, I spent 2 or 3 weeks in the US previous to it or during it. So perhaps that's a lucky trend, though maybe an expensive way to win. Yeah, to win twice is a great feeling. It's something that only a handful of us can say, or less than a handful of us can say. That's a good feeling to have.
Forge Flyers had become a 2-time champion, winning 2 in 3 years, the shortest gap between titles in LOC history, and only the 3rd coach to win multiple titles.
Yeah, I think that the god awful times make you better and spur you on to want to do better. You've got to make mistakes to be able to learn from them. You've got to make mistakes to know what it's like to feel bad, what it's like to make bad decisions, what it's like to pick the wrong players, what it's like to draft the wrong players. And that takes time, but it does show how much time that you need to be able to put into it to gain your knowledge, to know what's good and what's bad, and to find a love of sport. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that over that period it's gone from a very casual overseeing view of the sport, where I didn't know a great deal, to right now where I feel as though in the hierarchy of sports that I watch and involved in and are interested in, I would say it's probably in the top 3 now. And that's a massive change. If fantasy football can do that, it can stoke a fire. It can, I'm quite a competitive person at heart anyway. If it can continue doing that, or it can make me feel like I'm in a competition, then I'll do it for as long as I can, because I enjoy it, and I enjoy being part of something that these days is not only social, but it is very competitive. And there are 12 teams in this league that could win, and I firmly believe that. I firmly believe that everyone on their day can win, and that can't be said for a lot of things, like this that I've done in the past, or even this league in the past. And that's a long way to continue, because I think we've got a lot more competition and a lot more fantasy football in us yet.
With his 2nd title in 3 years, Chris has reversed the fortunes of what Forge Flyers had become. Within 5 years, Coach Leach went from 2-12 to 2 titles. Each season may not bring us success, but we all know what they're gonna do. Keep hauling.
Hold your course and don't let go.
Keep